once you've evoked this word, I don't really care anymore. And by the way, neither do you. If there was a genocide going on right now, we should probably militarily intervene.
We call them liberals. They're more focused on making sure people don't call this genocide.
I think Israel's goal is to eliminate Hamas. I think they have the moral authority to do so.
Your obsession with litigating the applicability of the word genocide here without adequate legal background is getting in the way of a bigger point. Genocide or not, there is no dispute that Israel is committing horrific war crimes in its deliberate war on Palestinians.
But this is the problem. We're not talking about this now. Now we're talking about the ICJ case with the genocide. That's the issue. It's your fault for bringing up these heavy legal terms. If you want to talk about the horrendous things that are happening right with the war, then just talk about the horrendous things happening in the course of the war. They are horrendous, and it's sad.
Hey, come on, man.
Well, I like how he just admits in the whole past 40 minutes of the video that I was correct. Okay, thank you. I think there's 2 or 3. I think in the last show that I did with Chris Williamson, there's got to be there's got to be a psychology model for this stuff. I talked about a little bit of this yesterday. There's a few things that I've identified, and I'm trying to get these models in my head so that I can better understand how to navigate conversations, how to understand communities, how to understand people. I try to the modeling is important so that I can predict and understand. Well, the understanding is important so you can predict. That's why understanding is important. All understanding all understanding is for, I guess for recreation if it's fiction, but all understanding is essentially for predictions. The more you know something, the more you can predict something, and then you can effect outcomes that make you happy or feel good, right? One thing that I've talked about a lot before, also I'm pretty sure everything I'm talking about, there's probably a more formal psych concept that underlines it, I just don't know what it is. But there is, something that I talk about is there is I talk about this as the constellation of beliefs. I've brought this up a few times, to where the beliefs that you get, how do I feel about climate change? How do I feel about Palestine? How do I feel about trans people? All of these things are just constellations, I think, that you more or less inherit these from whatever particular group that you belong to. So as soon as you join a group, you get all these beliefs, and you can't really change any of them that much. It's very, 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 very hard to, because all of these beliefs kind of come together to form the constellation. You can't, you're generally not going to find a big pro-Trump guy who thinks that Andrew Tate was wronged in Romania, who thinks that we should get out of Ukraine because we're just sending Ukrainian men to die, and who thinks the border is in crisis. You're not going to find a guy that believes all of those things, but is also pro-vaccine. He thinks the mRNA vaccines were, a scientific breakthrough, huge discovery, helped all of mankind, that we should support. You're not going to find that person, generally. There's going to be these pretty rigid, I think, constellations of beliefs that people tend to inherit when they're in certain social groups. And the constellation here is required, I think, to be a part of these social groups, at least for the very broad national ones. I think on more localized levels, you can find a little bit more nuance. So in Nebraska or Iowa, you might find conservatives that aren't, in Omaha, you might find a conservative that's not as extreme, or in a rural place, you might find a Democrat that's not super anti-gun and super whatever, right? But on the broad national level, it feels like you have these constellations where everybody has to pretty rigidly adhere to it. And the issue is that this is one thing. So when somebody like Mr. Beat is part of that certain online social group, it kind of demands conformity to any of these things. And one of these things is Israel-Palestine. You have to have a certain take on Israel-Palestine. You're never going to actually be able to enunciate the from foundation to applied. You're not going to be able to go all the way from here to here and explain why you might agree or disagree with somebody's takes. There's just going to be a set of, for every given star on this constellation, there's going to be there's just going to be a set of talking points that you kind of have to know. And there's no wandering from these talking points. So, it'll be there's a genocide, there's apartheid, there's concentration camps, there's indiscriminate bombing, there's Netanyahu funded Hamas, I guess. something about colonial settlerism or imperialism or Westernism or whatever the fuck. Yeah. So you've got your constellations, and then you've got your talking points, and these talking points will always come from social media. So it'll be in the form of TikTok videos, Twitter headlines, YouTube videos, or whatever, usually without any good analysis backing them up. YouTube, TikTok, X, Twitter. This is, I think this is unfortunate. I think it might be necessary because like humans have social groups and we value our conformity in our social groups because it makes us feel welcome and it gives us groups of friends to talk to. I'm very critical of people that do this, but I have a couple of advantages that allow me not to be part of the constellations because one, I'm a big content creator, so I make enough money that I can be relatively insulated from it. I don't feel the pressure to conform for views because I already get enough views. Two, I'm pretty okay with being on my own. I don't care if I burn bridges or if I'm not part of a social group or friend group. That's fine. Don't give a fuck. So I'm relatively insulated there. Three is I live my life in an insulated way. I'm not going to school. I'm not part of a fraternity. I'm not like in a job place, like a place of employment where there's a certain conformity demanded. So I have a lot of freedom to navigate away from the constellation systems in a way that a lot of people don't. So I might be really critical of a person for being part of a constellation, but they might have a family who's deeply conservative, or they might be part of a school, a college where the student body is incredibly progressive, and it's harder for them to break away from the constellation. This is like one. We're gonna call this constellation theory, okay? Yes, yeah. I'll make my own Mr. Girl manifesto on these. And then there's a second thing that I think happens. I'm trying to figure out, there's a concept that is a thing called the bigotry of small differences. Wait, is it the narcissism of small differences? Oh, fuck. I f***ed this up on the podcast then. Do you disagree with Mr. Beat's take on Nancy Pelosi's insider trading? Nothing from Congress has been proven for insider trading, so if he thinks that, I probably would. In psychoanalysis, the narcissism of small differences is the idea that the more a relationship or community shares commonalities, the more likely the people in it are to engage in interpersonal feuds and mutual ridicule because of hypersensitivity to minor differences. So I've been aware of like this concept for a while. So for instance, like you're really likely to infight, but you might get along with somebody with vastly different political beliefs than you, which is kind of hard to understand. Like, why can I get along with conservatives, but I have so much trouble getting along with leftists? And I think I have like a idea in my head now for why this is the case. Destiny, that's not true. Do you want me to show you evidence? Yeah, sure, if you have any. So I think the reason why it kind of ties into that constellation idea, but I think that what happens is in a perfect world, you've got some sort of, I'm just gonna call this investigation, okay? Some sort of investigation. And then this investigation leads to we'll say this investigation leads to some sort of belief, and then we'll say that this belief leads to some sort of applied position, okay? Are there two P's in applied? Yes. That doesn't look right. I think there are. Applied. Yeah, there are. My handwriting is just horrible. So in an ideal world, we start with some moral foundation, and then from this moral foundation, we might do a little bit of investigation over a particular issue. We'll say Israel-Palestine, okay? And we'll say, oh, well, is the bombing wrong, or is the bombing right? Is the bombing wrong? Let's say that we do a little bit of investigation. We find out, wow, there's a lot of civilians dying. I don't like that. I think that's bad. So we start off with this kind of moral position. We do a little bit of investigation, and then after some investigation, we're like, okay, well, I think that the bombing in Israel is bad. And then our applied position then is okay, well, Israel needs to stop bombing, okay? This is the ideal way that somebody would reason this out, okay? Unfortunately, though, I don't think this is what happens. I don't think we go through this whole process. Instead, what happens is you just inherit an applied position, and this implied position is tied to some value. So instead, what happens is, because you're part of the constellation, you get an applied position, and that's Israel needs to stop bombing Palestine. And it's like, oh, well, why? Well, because we don't want innocent people to die, and that's bad, and apartheid, and that's it. And then you get this sort of connection that happens here. And what happens is anytime somebody expresses any sort of applied proposition, like Israel is genocidal, Israel is apartheid, Israel is whatever, they're not actually expressing this chain of causality. They're not expressing that they've given this some thought and they've gone from here to here and this or that. What they're actually doing is they're just expressing a value that they have. When they say Israel bombing bad, need to stop, what they're saying is, I don't like civilians to be killed for no reason. That's what they're actually saying. And the problem with this then is that when you fight against this applied position, what you think is happening is you've done your own causal chain, and either your investigation was different or you came to a different belief about a thing, and then your applied position is different, and now you're going to fight over the applied stuff. And what you really want to do is go back and challenge the belief or challenge the investigation. You're not actually getting to challenge the belief or the investigation. What they think you're challenging is the value. That's what they think is happening. So for instance, you haven't seen this yet because I'm going to come out, but Moeen asked me, he said, in my Finkelstein debate, he said, I saw in your stream that you were doing research and you said that Jim Crow probably wasn't apartheid. And I said, well, no, I don't think it was. Now, in my mind, I've done the causal chain, right? Well, I know what apartheid is. I know roughly what Jim Crow was. I did some investigation. My belief is I don't think Jim Crow is apartheid. So my applied position is I wouldn't say Jim Crow is apartheid. But for Moeen, Jim Crow just means racism bad, okay? Apartheid means racism bad. And when I fight on the, well, I don't think Jim Crow was apartheid, he's hearing, oh, you don't think Jim Crow was racism. You don't think racism is bad. You think racism good. Which is why when I asked him afterwards, I was like, do you think that I supported Jim Crow laws or that I would support Jim Crow laws? He didn't answer. He didn't have an answer. Because in his mind, this short circuit is happening, right? Where the applied position is actually just inextricably tied intrinsically to a value. And the proposition that you're expressing is really only in in a non-cognitivist sort of way, okay, to use our Vosh words, you're just expressing a feeling about a thing, basically. You're expressing a value and then a feeling about a thing. And yeah, this is annoying to say the least, I think. This is annoying because then when somebody asks a question about, say, like, oh, how do you feel about genocide? And I say, well, I don't think that, or when they say, like, do you think a genocide? I don't think a genocide is happening right now in Palestine. Genocide is tied to the value of not wanting civilians to die. So what they hear is, so you think the bombing is fine. You think murdering civilians is okay. That's what they hear and that's what they argue against. And it's very, 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 very frustrating to do that. It's called emotivism. I thought it was called ethical. I thought this was the anti-realist branch of moral non-cognitivism. Maybe emotivism is another word for it, or maybe I just don't know any psych terms because or philosophy terms. Emotivism is a meta-ethical view that claims that ethical sentences do not express propositions but emotional attitudes. I thought that this was a normative ethical position. Emotivism versus anti-realist non-cognitivism. This is so cringe. Non-cognitivist and anti-realist theory 1, emotivism. According to emotivism, the moral statement that murder is wrong is simply an expression of emotion against the act of murdering. Wait, what is the difference then? I don't know. Who cares? Whatever. But anyway, the reason why I brought this up is, what would we call this? I would probably label these differently if I thought about this more. I'll call this value confusion, I guess. I don't know. Value confusion theory. Yeah, there we go. Like I said, if you want to go and dig through the literature, there's probably like actual formal psychological ways of understanding all these things. The reason why I brought up this in regards to why different people don't bother you as much is because I think that helps us. So if we take the constellations and somebody has all these beliefs, right, from the constellation, they're not actually expressing their beliefs or anything. They're just expressing the values they have with the constellation. So if I bump into a conservative, okay, let's say that I bump into a conservative and I say, I believe in a minimum wage. And the conservative says, I don't believe in a minimum wage, right? Well, in my mind, well, here, I'm sorry, we'll just take random dipshits, okay? When the conservative says, I don't believe in minimum wage, the conservative is really saying, he's making a statement about what he believes like the role of government should be in jobs. He's not actually, hasn't done like an analysis of the minimum wage impact on the economy. And like he might think he does or pretend he does, but he doesn't actually, right? He's just saying like, oh, I think that minimum wage is bad, right? And so that the minimum wage position is tied to this value of, small government, we'll say. Minimum wage, and we'll say it's tied to small government, okay? That's what he's expressing here. And then when the progressive says, well, I think we should have actually a $45 an hour minimum wage, the progressive hasn't done the analysis to know that if this is helping anybody, if it's good for the economy, whatever, they don't care. They're expressing the viewpoint of like welfare supporting like poor people, right? They're expressing some kind of like government intervention to help poor people, right? Now, when the progressive and the conservative bump heads on this, they don't really care about their difference in belief here, because I think they know that they're not actually expressing or if they don't know it, they intuitively feel it. They're not actually expressing a position on minimum wage. What they're expressing is this value. But this is a progressive and this is a conservative. They know that they're supposed to disagree on values. They don't care if they disagree on values. When I go up to a conservative and he says that I'm, like or I'm a degenerate or whatever, it's like, yeah, we disagree on everything. No shit, you think this. Like, obviously you do, right? And I think you're weird for your whole shit too. But like, why would I care? So when you're hitting people that are in completely different constellations, and you know that they're in completely different constellations, then who cares if they disagree with you? But the issue runs up when you meet people who are in similar constellations, or you think they're in a similar constellation, and then they express a position. And when they express a position and it's different than yours, the reason why there's so much trouble caused isn't because you think that you have just different disagreements about the minimum wage. The problem now is you feel like what they're going to attack you on is a fundamental disconnect in values. And this is where the big issue happens. Because if two people in a similar constellation say like, oh, like I'm supporting the minimum wage, and like, I don't know if I support the minimum wage. The guy that attacks you for your lack of support for the minimum wage, he's not saying like, that's really interesting. You don't think minimum wage is an effective policy to help poor people? What he says is, oh, you don't support minimum wage? It's because you're a big business shill and you don't think people deserve a living wage. You want to see homelessness, right? They don't actually hit you on any of the empirical applied, any of the investigative work, none of that. They go straight for the value thing. And if they're in a constellation that's similar to you, you don't, that doesn't feel good because you're like, wait, hold on. I thought purportedly we have the same values and now you're telling me I have a totally different set of values and that's not how I viewed us. And I think I think that like these concepts, this is like the rough mapping in my head of why these things are so difficult to overcome when you're dealing with like people of similar beliefs and why people get so upset. It's because when they attack you, they're attacking you on your values, not actually on your applied positions, right? Like nobody, if I dig through all of my tweets about like Israel-Palestine and the genocide claims I'm making, nobody, look at Noah Samsen's video, right? Nobody is going through my stuff and going, actually, Destiny, I actually super disagree with your genocide take. If you look at the obligations that states have under the Genocide Convention, of which every state is a party to, right? And then you look at the statements that a lot of Israeli leaders have made, and then you factor in the fact that, I don't know what other intent things you could find, but like we'll compare these to statements that were submitted to, in the 90s, the Tribunal on Yugoslavia or Myanmar, and the Gambia, and we compare these, we actually see that the intentionality statements made by a lot of Israeli leaders were actually pretty similar to the intentionality statements made by other people who have been declared in the ICJ as being genocidal. And that's why I think Destiny's wrong on this, right? That would be an applied position attacking an applied position, and then I could deal with that argument. It's like, okay, well, let's chat about that. By the way, because I could be wrong, but that's never the case. Instead, what it is Destiny's pro-genocide. Destiny hates Palestinians. He wants Israeli people to murder as many people as possible. He doesn't care if innocent civilians are murdered. He supports war crimes. He wants them all to get raped and killed. It's like that's the attack, because it just comes to it's just values clashing and no actual thoughtful analysis done on the on the words themselves. One of the bad things I think one of the bad things about this is there's a lot of bad things about this. I think there's a lot of bad things about this. One of the bad things about using the big words, though, is there's an optical illusion with colors to where I think, is it rods? Are rods the things in your eyes that see color, or cones? Rods or cones for color? No, cones. The cones in your eyes can only get hit by the same color so much before they start to fatigue and they are less receptive to it. And I think they start to compensate for it to kind of erase it from your image. This is why, for instance, you have blind spots in both of your eyes. Even if you close an eye, you can't actually perceive your blind spot because your brain and your eyes work together to kind of like edit that image out. Or there's a whole bunch of blood vessels that are running directly over is it your retina? Is that what's in the back? Or I should know these from camera. Thing in back of eye that sees images. It is retina. You've got a ton of blood vessels, I think, that go over that. And there's a trick that you can use where you take like a piece of, I think, clear white paper, and then you put your eyes up and you shake it back and forth. And for 20 or 30 seconds, you can actually see all of the blood vessels. But ordinarily, your eyes just kind of like filter it all out because you know. And the same thing happens with colors. I think we can all do this if you want. Stare at this for, I think, 30 seconds, okay? And eventually, not even 30 seconds, I'm sorry, it takes like 10 seconds. After about 10 seconds, it just looks white. Everything has disappeared, right? And I think there's a similar thing that happens with, by the way, this is completely my conjecture. This is not scientifically backed, so now I'm just like extrapolating and conjecturing because I don't actually know. But I feel like this happens with everything in your life. It might be a noise that you start to hear less of. Maybe it's black women and fire alarms. Maybe it's insert white person stereotype in school shooters. They don't hear me. I don't know. Maybe it's whatever. Like you stop paying attention to certain things and you just don't notice them anymore. Maybe it's girls with bangs that are in front of their eyes that you never get used to. For me, it's like having hair in my ears drives me crazy. Once it gets to a certain length, then I forget about it, etc. You become desensitized to it. And I think the issue you run into is when we get on this treadmill where you have to use the worst word ever to describe things, you start to become disconnected from reality and you lose the ability to bring in this word when you really need it. You want to be able to bring this in, but you can't do it, okay? Civilian deaths are tragic. That sucks, right? Indiscriminate bombing is worse. That's really bad, okay? We don't want that. Targeting civilians this is a step above both of these things. That's really bad. This is a war crime. I think indiscriminate bombing might also be a war crime. At the very least, it's a contravention of several international laws in terms of law of armed conflict. So this is super bad. This is incredibly bad, prosecutable in the ICC. And then you might see like mass population, attacks, like famines or whatever. And then you hit this on the bottom here where like you're genociding somebody, right? I know I said this doesn't exist on a spectrum because it doesn't technically, but in terms of moral gravity, like this is kind of our chain right now. And the issue is once you've evoked this word, I don't really care anymore. And by the way, neither do you. The people that use genocide and the people that use apartheid don't actually give a because like if there was a genocide going on right now, okay, between Israel and Palestine, we should probably militarily intervene. Like sanctions and holding back of aid would be way down the list of crucial things that need to be done. It would probably be military intervention immediately. Yeah. Like we're on such an insane level. But because we've used this word so many times, like it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't really carry the same weight. Like genocide just means, remember, going back to the constellations and to the value statements, genocide just means that like, oh, civilian death bad. I don't like it when civilians die. And if you disagree on the genocide thing, well, I mean, yeah. I mean, do you disagree? You think civilians should die? You've lost the value here. And for a real life example of this, I didn't make this statement on Finkelstein and Rabbani, although now I think I should have, but I'm so scared that there's something I'm missing. My understanding, and I think that this would blow most people's minds, my understanding is prior to October 7th, I don't know if there was a single death due to starvation in the entire Gaza Strip in the history of the Gaza Strip. I looked around for stories about that. I tried to find news. I tried to find information. I couldn't find a single example. But despite the fact that there has been zero deaths due to starvation in the Gaza Strip, zero, okay? Despite that fact, I can find UN statements all the way back to 2008 saying that the Gaza Strip is unlivable. Unlivable. It will become unlivable in 5 years. It's already unlivable. 97% toxic water, caloric restrictions, mass famine, and no starvation deaths? Not a single one? Not even one. Not even one death to starvation? So now, and the reason why I say this now is because past October 7th, okay, in Gaza, an ungodly amount of people have been moved in this conflict. Over 1 million people, I think, have been displaced. And now you're hitting an area where, with all these people displaced and with aid being rationed because either accusations of Israel blocking the trucks or the UN not feeling safe enough to drive the trucks in, now you might actually hit an area where you could run into famine level or starvation level events. But who's going to care? You've been saying that the people in this area have been starving to death for 20 years? A 30% obesity rate? A human development index that basically ranks them in the green almost? That's like 200ths away from ranking them in the green on the HDMI? Child mortality rates, under 5 mortality rates, all of these things that are about in line with the entirety of the region? No actual discernible deaths due to malnutrition, due to starvation. Why should anybody believe? Did I say HDMI? HDI, Human Development Index, sorry, HDMI, whatever. They need HDMI TVs. Yeah, but like you've lost the ability to use these words to mean anything because you've overused them so much that our eyes are no longer seeing it because it's like, yeah, I guess, famine, who cares? And yeah, that's like my whole chain of irritation when people like Noah Samsen make videos virtue signaling about like, you don't think there's genocide? Ah! And it's like, why not just like, let's talk about what's actually happening so that we can do things to hold both sides to account rather than having fantasy conversations about the most insane possible words that we could ever fucking use, you know? Destiny, we're on day 204 of Gaza only having 48 hours left until all water, food, and electricity completely run out. Yes, I know. Yeah, Jesus. I also read at least one of those starvations were very specific because it was about cerebral palsy guy could only, yeah. The reason why I didn't bring it up too is because the day of the debate, I think that day, Al Jazeera reported 6 deaths due to starvation, and then Al Jazeera reported 2 deaths the day before. I don't know if those were true or not. I didn't have time to look into it, but Destiny, if they didn't dilute the word over the last N years, would we do anything different now? I don't know. I mean, like the humanitarian situation in South Gaza, my understanding is it's pretty severe. That's a lot of people who are super displaced in an area that was already like developing, like kind of unstable, who are having issues getting food in and out now. But there's a couple things that are going on. One is the language that we've used internationally has deadened our senses to actually being able to understand what's going on. And then 2, the only side that has the obligation is apparently Israel. Nobody holds Hamas responsible. Not even for the October 7th attacks, you know, fuck that. Forget even the October 7th attacks. They don't hold them responsible for being an administrator in the region at all. Why not? Like, you can build all those tunnels. You can build all those miles of underground tunnels. You can't build bomb shelters for your people. You can spend all that fuel, all that money on thousands of rockets on October 7th and then complain that your hospitals are running out of fuel. You can shut down MRIs and these giant fucking, you know, hospital rooms and make them inoperable because you want to store weapons in them? Like, there has to be some responsibility, and according to international law, there has to be some responsibility on, on Israel to, or not on Israel, on Hamas to administer to the region. Like, and then also, like, yeah, and then what I said before about everything being blackpilling. So I've gone back and forth on the Great March of Return, like, 4 times, okay? When I first read about the Great March of Return, it seemed like a peaceful protest, And then I don't know why Israel shot and killed so many people. Then when I read a little bit more about it, it seemed like, oh, well, no, there were some terrorists there that were trying to do bad things. And then I saw a UN report. I think this might have even been mentioned in the Wikipedia. The UN did an investigation on this. Bro, I hate this topic. I'm so unhappy that I ever got involved in this stupid fucking Israel-Palestine bullshit. I'm not going to be able to find it. The UN did an investigation, and the UN said that of like the 200 people that Israel shot and killed, only one of those was justified. And then when I read that, I was like, oof. Okay, well, maybe, maybe that's not okay then. Can anybody find the report that I'm talking about? Oh, I'm not gonna be able to find it. But basically, the UN comes to the conclusion that I think it was either one or two of the deaths that happened were actually justified. I read this a long time ago, but now that I was all Vyvanced up, I actually read through, I think it might have been this report. And do you know how the UN comes to that one or two death number? The way that they do it is their form of analysis of that conflict. The way that they justify it is they say, we chose to analyze this conflict not under the rules of international or even within country armed conflict. They analyzed it as a policing event. And then their rules were, in policing events, the only time a police officer is allowed to kill somebody is if there's a direct threat to their life. But that would mean under that form of analysis that the UN engaged in, if somebody is sending like an incendiary balloon or trying to break through the wall to get over the other side of Israel or doing tunnel work, whatever, anytime a police officer kills one of those people, that's illegal. You can't do that. Police officers can't kill people. But they weren't analyzing it as a Hamas event, which a lot of it, not a lot of it, but a lot of the infiltration part was. And they were also applying very weird standards to the civilians that were taking part of that event, because if you're a civilian and you're working alongside somebody that can be identified as a member of an armed conflict, you no longer are hors de combat. You no longer have those protections as a civilian, because for the times that you engage in hostilities, you lose that. You lose your hostilities. Where is it? International law. I wish I could remember what I saw about this exactly. Persons taking no active part in hostilities, including members of armed forces who have laid down arms, blah, blah, blah. I think there's a specific rule that has to do... Oh, it's this. Participants in... Oh, wait. Oh, this actually I did... This was for the Finkelstein debate. Oh, and I read the response to this on the International Humanitarian Law site. But this guy who does an analysis here, like his response is, if some of the demonstrators can be classified as direct participants in the armed conflict that exists between Israel and the Hamas, this is certainly the case with respect to the terrorists, and the armed persons among them, two close categories also include both members of the terrorist organizations who disguise themselves as demonstrators, which happened, by the way, and also participants in the protest who agree to serve as human shields. The voluntary human shield concept also means that you lose your protections as a civilian, by the way, or that's debatable, arguable, but probably. For the terrorists hiding behind them, then the demonstrators lose the protections granted to them pursuant to the principle expressed in Article 51.3, the first additional protocol to the Geneva Convention, which prescribes that the protections offered to them as civilians shall be removed for such time during which they actually take a part in hostilities. In situations such as those, it is highly likely that the three-pronged criterion, which was outlined by the team of international experts that the Red Cross convened, would be fulfilled. Upon the fulfillment of the three conditions by the demonstrators, civilians who take part in hostilities lose their protections. But anyway, yeah, this is just another random. There are so many like random UN things, so many random analyses relating to Israel where like the analysis is just insanely wrong. Like, why would you analyze this as a policing event? Fuck, I wish I could find the original UN report where it explains their methodology. Fuck, I'm not gonna be able to link to it. I'm not gonna be able to find it. I wish I could just so I could, yeah. At what point is it fair to become suspicious of anti-Semitism for the pro-Palestinian side? I mean, I just try not to think in those terms because it's not helpful and it's hard to prove it. And it's like, just attack like the bad points. But like, I definitely understand the feeling. Just echoing some thoughts of my Israeli friends, and I wonder what would be your response? A lot are talking about how the UN, ICJ, and other human rights groups abandoned us and didn't protect us when it needed to. So why should we care about what they have to say? What would be your response and thoughts? I mean, like, yeah, I mean, I understand it. Like, that was another question I think that I asked Finkelstein that he didn't respond to, because he brought up, well, in 242, you're not allowed to acquire territory through conflict. And I was like, okay, well, what about in 48? And he just did the whatever. And then he tried to argue, there was another international law segment. Oh, I sound weak here. And I second guessed myself. I said, didn't they? I shouldn't have even let myself do it. But Finkeldick said, because I always bring up the point that like international law doesn't constrain your negotiations, and oftentimes they happen outside of international law. It's like, well, that's not true. When Egypt settled peace with Israel, they gave back every single inch of the Sinai. And I was like, okay, but Israel also recaptured the Gaza Strip that Israel recaptured the Gaza Strip and the Sinai that Egypt had until 67. They didn't give back the Gaza Strip, right? And then he did the smirk thing again.
At a time when Israel is killing Palestinians at unprecedented rates, at a time when Israel is bombing hospitals, ambulances, refugee camps, deliberately targeting journalists and their entire families, at a time when Israel has flattened most of Gaza, rendering it uninhabitable, there's a select group of individuals, we call them liberals, that aren't quite focused on that. They're more focused on making sure people don't call this genocide.
I think Israel's goal is to eliminate Hamas. I think they have the moral authority to do so. Unfortunately, there is a high cost right now of civilian casualties. I'm not sure there's any way to avoid that at the moment. So when we say there's not any way to avoid the civilian casualties at the moment, the avoiding can't be never going to war. I'm sorry, like I know that, bro, I'm trying so hard not to. I understand the Israeli desire to wield the anti-Semitism card now, because I think Finkelstein is anti-Semitic. I think that Moin guy was anti-Semitic. And I'm starting to see it more. And I don't know if I'm getting mind by the Mossad. Okay, if the Jewish space lasers are mind controlling me, but holy shit. I'm sorry, but when you terrorist attack a country and you kill 1,200 people and you hostage take 250 people, every single one of these things was in contravention of international law. Every single one of those stages. When you do all of those things and then the entire world says, sorry, you can't go to war with them because you might kill some civilians. That would be against the rules. That's f***ing stupid. That can't be the standard. That cannot be the standard. So no, when we say, I don't know if there's a way to avoid that. I don't know if there's a way to avoid that and accomplish your military goal. And the goal of killing Hamas is a worthy one. It is a totally acceptable goal from Israel. You'd be hard pressed to find anybody to say, who's not a total f***ing idiot, that that's not an acceptable goal. There's any way to avoid that at the moment. I'm not sure there's any way to avoid that at the moment. No other fighting force in the world does what Israel does when it comes to warning people about imminent attacks.
This guy
This is also true. Nobody else drops leaflets, makes phone calls, does roof knocking, knocks on fucking, like nobody does all of these things. You don't have to believe me. I'm pretty sure there was an analyst for it was that one. It was duty to warn. The IDF understands these realities and has accordingly long provided warnings before attacking targets in Gaza and elsewhere. See, for example, report on 2008 Gaza operations, blah, 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 blah. These practices have drawn a great deal of attention. For instance, an International Law Association study group in the conduct of hostilities, of which I was a member, observed in 2017 that Israel's 2014 operations in Gaza and the extensive efforts to provide such warnings have elevated the discourse on this warning's precaution to unprecedented levels. Some worry that the Israeli Defense Forces created an unrealistically high bar on when and how to provide warnings. Conversely, some condemn the idea because the warnings did not produce their intended effects. Finally, some suggested the extent of warnings were the result of policy decisions and not legal obligations. What can be said with confidence is that the IDF regularly uses a wide variety of warnings, almost certainly more than any other military. Best known are phone calls to individuals within a building to be struck and those nearby in order to gather information about the number of people there and instruct them to evacuate. As I previously explained, following a research trip to Israel with Colonel John Merriam at the invitation of the IDF, see his post on our findings here, to conduct the phone warnings, the IDF employs a specialized team of trained personnel who run a phone bank with the sole purpose of contacting individuals who might be affected by a strike. The calls are in some cases extremely precise. For instance, the warnings may be that a strike will occur at a specific time. Live operators make some phone warnings, while others consist of generic pre-recorded messages. The personnel in the warnings cells speak Arabic fluently, have received cultural training on the civilian population in the target area, and whenever feasible, use all source-fused intelligence to focus on specific individuals who might be at risk. For example, understanding Palestinian culture and family structures, the warning cell may try to contact the head male of a family in a particular apartment building, knowing that he will effectively disseminate the warning to other family members. If a minor or a female answers the phone call, the warning cell attempts to speak to the head of the family. When several buildings in a particular area are targeted, the warning cell may also contact a local official, a local civilian official, or an informal community leader who will also try to spread the warning effectively and insist on obedience. The IDF conveys warnings by many other means, such as leaflets, social media, text messages, and radio and television broadcasts, and it regularly monitors the area to assess whether civilians have heeded the warnings. For instance, the IDF has been harvesting data from mobile phones in Gaza to give it a real-time picture of where Gazans are located, following its warnings to evacuate the north. So yes, my understanding is, and if anybody wants to provide an actual counter, not just soy over, death figures, I don't think any other military in the world, wait, look up the word gold standard mark. Does somebody else? Without more facts, it is too early to say whether the IDF has complied with the obligation to warn in every case. However, there's no question that the IDF's warning practice in general is the gold standard. Indeed, as a matter of policy, the IDF typically exceeds what the law requires. It is likewise clear that that its warnings to evacuate northern Gaza constitutes an effective warning, as that concept is understood in international humanitarian law. This is in sharp contrast to Hamas's failure to provide any warnings to the civilian population of Gaza and its efforts to neutralize the effectiveness of the IDS. That Hamas has violated its own warning obligation under IHL is simply indisputable. IHL meaning international humanitarian law. Yo, is the discussion with Jordan Peterson get recorded? Yes, F me for being continually online. Sorry I haven't been here. I don't know what you're talking about. I just showed up. I love you, G. Take care. It should be released sometime soon. Thank you for $100. Love you, Zachary. Yeah, so I don't know, like, you can quote me and then, like, laugh and look at the camera and do, like, your soy posting, but, I mean, give me an example. Give me an argument. That at the moment, I'm not sure if there's any way to avoid that at the moment. No other fighting force in the world does what Israel does when it comes to warning people about imminent attacks.
This guy is, what's his name, Destiny, I think? Yeah, he's like some type of influencer, internet guy. He is one of the loudest of such liberals that really just don't like hearing the G word when we're talking about what Israel is doing right now. Destiny went on a Twitter storm the other day. We're going to read these tweets. We're going to see how he justifies this assertion. And yeah, that's today's video, and hope you enjoy. If Israel wanted to genocide Palestinians, then they would only exist in the history books.
Okay, this is a tweet. It's not technically a good argument against genocide, though, because again, you could act in a way where 1,000 Palestinians are killed and it's genocidal, or you can act in a way where you literally nuke the entire Gaza Strip and it's not genocidal. So it's not actually an argument in favor. It's just it's a tweet. But also, I've had hours and hours of conversation on this. Why are you debating tweets of mine?
Okay, yeah, so we see what's going on there. So because Israel hasn't wiped all Palestinians off the face of the earth, then they have yet to commit a genocide. That's what's being expressed here, right? If you read the UN's definition of genocide, any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such. Killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. There's no requirement or stipulation for total annihilation. If that births within the group, forcibly
While that's true, A, B, C, D, and E, none of these actually mattered that much. Like, they're part of genocide, but the most important part is the intent to destroy. Because you can do almost all of these other things and it not be genocide. If, for instance, in the nuking of Hiroshima, you've killed members of the group, obviously. You've caused serious bodily and mental harm to members of the group, obviously. You're deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, obviously. Imposing measures intended to prevent births, maybe not. And forcibly transferring children, maybe not. So maybe not D and E. But like, again, the matter here is the intent, the special intent. That's what makes it genocide.
Transferring children of the group to another group.
Oh, but these people probably think the atomic bombings were genocidal. Maybe, yeah.
There's no requirement or stipulation for total annihilation. If that were the case, a lot of genocides, most genocides would not meet the definition. A notable one being the Holocaust. Yeah. The logic in this tweet implies that because some Jews survived the Holocaust, the Nazis must not have wanted it that bad, because if they had, they would have succeeded. Anybody else sense that? There's Hitler particles emanating from this tweet? Journalists.
It also doesn't make much sense to use that comparison because Germany did try to kill every single Jew that they had or could get their hands on, sometimes even to the detriment of the military effort. I'm pretty sure when Germany was negotiating with other countries or invading other countries, he was saying, listen, you need to kill all the Jews here. We need to ship them to the fucking camps that we set up in Poland. We need to do, like, yeah, that was an obsessive war aim of Hitler. By the way, people that didn't even pose a military threat to the country, right? It's not like the Jews were rising up and fighting against fucking Hitler, in the beginning stages of fucking World War II that the Jews represent, right? They were just fucking Holocaust. It was part of his fucking idea. Yeah, they started to fight later on when they were being mass executed in death camps, but there was clearly not a military aim here for the genocides that were committed in Germany. And you couldn't even think of a military aim. It wouldn't even make sense to try to think of a military aim.
Mehdi Hassan responded to that last tweet from Destiny, writing, per this argument, China isn't guilty of genocide in Xinjiang because the Uyghurs still exist. Same with Russia in Ukraine. Destiny quote tweeted this, writing, China is guilty of genocide because they are intentionally trying to eliminate a group of people, and it shows. There is no evidence of Israel doing this to Palestinians today. No evidence. Just, there's nothing. It's like
intentional. I need to highlight the intent part, but nobody actually even cares about it. Nobody cares about intent for anything, to be fair, I guess. Like, it doesn't matter.
Oh, shoot, okay. It feels weird. Everyone's like really up in arms about what's going on. Are they just making it up? Oh, hold on, hold the fort. I just found something on my computer. It's an 84-page document submitted to the International Court of Justice that outlines in detail.
You should go, this will take maybe like an hour and a half to read. It's a really easy document to read, and it's really stupid.
With citations, the plethora of
Do you think this guy would ever talk to you? No, he literally says at the end that he doesn't want to talk to me. Yeah.
Evidence of Israel's genocidal actions and intent. Chat, is this real? Is this a thing? Just to preface this document.
Wouldn't his point imply that he thinks that Israelis are killing people in Gaza, not over territory, but over the fact that they are Palestinian? Yes, that is the implication, which is where I wonder, and it's really hard not to see it, if the anti-Semitic shit, this was another point that came up in the Twinkle Dick and the Muin debate, because they ended up bringing up the IDF killing 4 Palestinian children on the beach next to all the reporters in the Gaza Strip. And I don't remember if it was a debate with Lycan, but I'm very familiar with this case. I was like, oh, hold on. They didn't just kill 4 boys. They couldn't tell that they were boys, but they shot and killed them, or they attacked them with a drone because they were literally playing in a place that had been identified as a Hamas compound. That's what happened. And they were like, oh no, you really think that's realistic? And then my counter question was, okay, well, hold on. This was a drone strike, meaning it wasn't just a single soldier. You're telling me that multiple levels of commanders, of intelligence, of everybody involved in this strike cell or whatever, all of these people said, we're just going to kill 4 Palestinian children today for the lulz, because it would be fun to kill four Palestinian children. And both of them were like, yes. And I'm like, what? What an unhinged statement. What an unhinged statement to make.
An application is pretty unprecedented. The ICJ is the UN's highest court. It's the world court, basically. And after hearing South Africa's case against Israel, they ended up ruling that Israel is plausibly committing genocide. They fell short of calling for a ceasefire, but they did order, with near unanimous approval, that Israel must—
Don't say they fell short of they didn't fall short of calling a ceasefire. They didn't even consider the ceasefire. They didn't even write anything at all, even considering the ceasefire, because it was a ridiculous fucking ask. They didn't even consider it. They didn't fall short. Like, they were just like, what?
halt any actions in Gaza that could constitute genocide, which, according to the ICJ, they are currently plausibly undertaking. There is no evidence that Israel has changed anything about their rhetoric or military strategy in the months since this ruling. So
remember, plausible just means it's the lowest standard to even consider to hear a case. It doesn't mean that there's like a good chance of that. They weren't asked to rule on the merits or the well-founded claims of South Africa just to say like, well, given all these facts, if they're true, yeah, I guess maybe.
By the court's logic, the final verdict should be obvious, but unfortunately, we likely won't see that conclusion for at least another few years because we live in hell. Okay,
I like how it's obvious that they're committing genocide. The court should be obvious.
Has changed anything about their rhetoric or military strategy in the months since this ruling. So, by the court's logic, the final verdict should be obvious, but unfortunately, we likely won't see that conclusion for at least another few years because we live in hell. Okay, enough yapping. We're starting on page 30, section C. Genocidal acts committed against the Palestinian people. This section provides an overview of the acts in which Israel is engaged that are genocidal in character having regard to their nature, scope, and...
When you say that's the lowest standard, does that mean there's an array of standards? Sure, you've got like, I think, I don't know if everybody uses it the same way as they do in the United States, but you've got like probable cause, you've got a balance of, what is the 51% called? On the balance of probabilities, you've got beyond a reasonable doubt. Yeah, you've got different standards in law.
Context. These acts are ongoing in a conflict context where Israel is deliberately...
Does the ICJ use these though? Yes. I will reread the quote. Yes, the judges literally say that they are not asked. The court is not asked in this present phase of the proceedings to determine whether South Africa's allegations of genocide are well-founded. They're not even determining if the allegations are well-founded. Another judge, Judge Nolte, went on to say, the information provided by South Africa regarding Israel's military operation is not comparable to the evidence before the court in the Gambia versus Myanmar in 2020. While the applicant cannot now be expected to provide the court with detailed reports of an international fact-finding mission, it is not sufficient for South Africa to point to the terrible death and destruction that Israel's military operation has brought about and is continuing to bring about. The applicant must be expected to engage not only with the stated purpose of the operation, namely to destroy Hamas and to liberate the hostages, but also with other manifest circumstances, such as the calls to the civilian population to evacuate, an official policy and orders to soldiers not to target civilians, the way in which the opposing forces are confronting each other on the ground, that means Hamas using human shields, as well as the enabling of the delivery of a certain amount of humanitarian aid, all of which may give rise to other plausible inferences from an alleged pattern of conduct than genocidal intent. Rather, these measures by Israel, while not conclusive, make it at least plausible that its military operation is not being conducted with genocidal intent. South Africa has not called these underlying circumstances into question and has, in my view, not sufficiently engaged with their implications for the plausibility of the rights of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip deriving from the Genocide Convention. Oh, and then earlier quote from the same judge. The court must remain conscious that the Genocide Convention is not designed to regulate armed conflict as such, even if they are conducted with an excessive use of force and result in mass casualties.
Imposing telecommunications blackouts on Gaza, restricting access by fact-finding bodies and international media. Section 1 outlines the actions defined as killing Palestinians in Gaza. It goes over the death toll, which is actually out of date. Currently, it's sitting at 28,000, not 21,000. The percentage of women and children killed, which is 70. The 15,000 people forming.
It's all just like
immediate risk.
Quoting.
Were dropped on the refugee camp. And articles on the Gaza
like
started banging.
Civilians in certain areas of Gaza leave their homes for other areas. The first of which they need to purge. Since early, at least 8,660 students and 209 teachers. Exam grades in the whole of Palestine killed with multiple.
Like, it's just like people killed. It's just like going over a bunch of news articles of like people getting killed, which sucks. But it's war. But it sucks. But it's war. It's not necessarily genocide just because it sucks. Beanpod, thanks for the 5 gifted memberships. Remember, everything that sucks is not genocide.
Members of her family in a strike on Al Nusra giving birth is to undergo a hysterectomy in order for their lives. Amalek by the Israelites. That was the deputy speaker of the Knesset. It can be assumed that some of the Hamas fighters and future.
אני לא לקחתי שבויים. בזמן קרב, אם מישהו הרים ידיים, משהו כזה, לא לקחתי שבויים. אם היה עומדת כיתה של זה, עם ידיים למעלה, אז באותו יום הייתי רואה אותי, הייתי קוצר את כולם, עד כדי כך.
כמה אתה חושב אנשים הרגת ככה?
לא ספרתי. לא יכול לדעת בחיי. היה לי מקלע.
Well, this is not base, but... Anytime, I haven't done the research. Anytime you get these interviews with one person, always look up, like, who is the interviewer, who's talking, what the fuck is this even about? Because I don't trust any of this shit now, but...
This list goes on and on and on, and I hope by now at least some of you are able to look at this and say, you know, maybe there's some evidence in there. I don't know what better evidence you can have of genocidal intent than looking into the camera and saying, I want to do a genocide, we want to do a genocide, we want to kill everybody, we want to do it right now as soon as we can, and then immediately taking actions over and over and over again that are meant to achieve that goal. How much clearer does it get, man? We're going to return now.
Like, really?
To a few more of Destiny's tweets because, you know, that's the point of this video, to look at an influencer's tweets and call him dumb, not use drama farming as a Trojan horse to read the ICJ application that lays out a pretty compelling case that Israel's committing genocide. That's not the point of this video. We're here to farm. Omar Badar is another person who responded to that initial tweet from Destiny. He wrote, your obsession with litigating the applicability of the word genocide here without adequate legal background is getting in the way of a bigger point. Genocide or not, there is no dispute that Israel is committing horrific war crimes in its deliberate war on Palestinians.
But this is the problem. We're not talking about this now. Now we're talking about the ICJ case with the genocide shit. That's the issue. It's your fault for bringing up these heavy legal terms. If you want to talk about the horrendous things that are happening right with the war, then just talk about the horrendous things happening in the course of the war. They are horrendous, and it's sad. And there are a lot of Palestinians on the course of famine, real famine. Not the famine that the UN, and not the famine that Finkeldick, and not the famine that everybody else has been talking about that has apparently been going on in Gaza for 20 years, but an actual real famine where people might actually start dying of starvation if they haven't already, depending if you believe Al Jazeera reporting or not. Like, let's talk about that, not apartheid, not genocide, not like all the other weird fucking buzzwords that we want to throw around because just talking about the actual facts on the ground are too boring, I guess.
Civilians. Destiny responded, writing, I mean, it's possible that the IDF is, but the other side is committing a fuck ton of war crimes for sure. It's possible? It's possible? Aside from the fucking CEO of the Israeli War Crimes Institute for Defending War Crimes College, Destiny is the only guy casting doubt on the assertion that Israel is committing war crimes. They're on video. When it comes to Hamas's war crimes, it's for sure.
What do you mean? He doesn't even know. He doesn't even know what they are. I don't care. Zachary, thanks for the $100. You're retarded.
very sure about that. When it comes to Israel's, maybe. I don't know. Who's to say? Who's to say? The other absurd part about this tweet is him saying that no one cares about holding Hamas responsible. My brother in Christ, what do you think Israel thinks it's doing? Literally only
Yeah, and what is the point of like the entire rest of the world telling Israel to stop doing it? I mean, like that's the whole point, right?
reason this genocide is still going on is because Israel is saying that they are, quote unquote, large quotes, holding Hamas responsible. Also, the United States, virtually every Western media apparatus, that's why every major interview has to start off with 12 minutes of the host telling the guest to condemn Hamas, condemn Hamas, condemn Hamas. Come on, do you condemn Hamas? Another person responded to that tweet writing, since when does death toll in an active war not count? Destiny replied saying, question mark, question mark, question mark, going to war is not genocide. People die in war, that doesn't make it genocide. Civilians die in war, that doesn't make it genocide. Even if you commit war crimes and target civilians, that's not genocide. So he's just sort of milking the one thing he's been technically correct on, which is that death tolls alone are not the same thing as genocide. They're not, but also no qualified commentator in this discussion is saying that. I personally don't consider a random 700 follower Twitter user to be a qualified commentator, but that's just me personally, I guess. He likes to do this thing. He does a few other tweets. Somebody wrote, paraphrasing him, if you commit war crimes and target civilians, that's not genocide. Lamau. He responded writing, how stupid are people? Hey, come on, man.
Well, I like how he just admits in the whole past 40 minutes of the video that I was correct. Okay, thank you. But okay. I like...
war crimes and target civilians, that's not genocide. Lamau. He responded writing, how fucking stupid are people? Hey, come on, man. Relax. Jesus. Yes, why would you think you're making a point here? What do you even think genocide is? Just killing civilians? Once again, the original statement taken on its own as a tweet is technically incorrect. War crimes and civilian targeting usually are a part of genocide. Actually using the term requires other factors. But also, he here took an incomplete version of this person's argument. A minute after that first tweet, they replied to their own tweet writing, there's actually a wealth of evidence that Israeli forces are committing genocide. All of it was used and quoted in the ICJ. The war crimes and civilian targeting in the original tweet are clearly referencing a specific application, which...
I don't see... Bro, if I click quote tweets on my tweet, I don't see all of the replies that they're making under their own tweet. I don't it's not like it's not like I'm clicking through and reading every other thing they put underneath it.
Does display genocide. He didn't respond to that original tweet, and you could see why, right? The tweet makes his big epic dunk a moot point. Here you might say, well, no, he maybe just didn't see that second tweet. And it's like, maybe, but also, it was tweeted a minute after. And the first thing you see when you click on a tweet is replies from the original author. I think
that's like... This is normally how I quote tweet. So if I bring up a tweet, I can click the things and I can view quotes, and then I usually just quote from here. Bro is still sore. A British twink sees his means of reproduction. Nice. Oh, and then this racist subhuman fuck. And then I do this, and then I quote. I don't know what else they're fucking tweeting underneath here. For me to actually see what's underneath the tweet, I would have to click through and then actually look for more responses. But I just quote tweet from here. Does he even use Twitter? Why the implication that I'm ignoring, especially a tweet that would be so easily visible if I was ignoring it?
You can see why, right? The tweet makes his big epic dunk a moot point. Here you might say, well, no, he maybe just didn't see that second tweet. And it's like, maybe, but also, it was tweeted a minute after. And the first thing you see when you click on a tweet is replies from the original author. I think the more likely explanation is just that it's easier to pick incomplete criticism to dunk on. It's just you want to win. You win that point. You win that point in response. Congratulations.
Or I've just got hundreds of people that are quote tweeting and responding to me, and I don't have time to go through every single one of their tweets. Destiny, is there any genocide that looks even remotely similar to this current war? I don't know of a single known genocide where there wasn't mass reports of shit like massacres, rounding up people for execution or deportation, in which I'm not sure actually. Maybe we should go through the ones that the ICJ has litigated. Look at what actually was happening in Bosnia. Look at what the Myanmar Rohingya stuff actually looks like, and then go through it and actually see it maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
But you won in the most annoying and inconsequential way possible. One wonders how someone like this ends up getting divorced very publicly and then making hours and hours of content talking about his ex-wife. I mean, it's just, normal stuff.
What is the weird personal attacks here from a guy? What the fuck? It's such a random bizarro ad-hom. Holy shit.
Cool stuff. Another response to that first tweet was someone saying, if Nazi Germany wanted to genocide all the Jews, then they would only exist in the history books, Destiny circa 1943. And he's just quoting the logic back. We did that earlier. How does Destiny respond to this? Well, he does it by doing a sneaky little switcheroo. The Jewish population still hasn't recovered from the Holocaust, a genocide lasting a few years that's some 80 years old.
What was the percentage of Jews that were killed in Germany and Poland? I got percentage of Jewish people in Germany, Poland killed World War II. Because didn't some of the death camps have literally like 97, 98, 99% kill rates? Wasn't it an insane number of people? Somebody put in YouTube chat earlier that it was in the Treblinka one or whatever the fuck, or Auschwitz or whatever, that 37 Jews were pulled out of this camp afterwards, and 1 million had been killed there. I wonder if there's anything that lists the total the total number of people. Is there like a total number of Jews that were inside of like German conquered areas that got? I'm trying to find that. The guy in the YouTube chat was saying. So maybe a third of Austrian Jews were killed. A fourth of Belgium Jews. Deaths unknown here. What is this, like a 2/3 of Czechoslovakian Jews? What is this, like 65% of Bohemia, Moravian Jews? Oh no, I'm sorry, this is all under Czechoslovakia. These are different areas in Czechoslovakia, I guess. In Germany, it was over 50%. By the way, none of this also technically matters. Like, this doesn't necessarily make it a genocide. I think the fact that there was no conceivable military reason to do this is probably one of the big things that makes it a genocide. But Jesus.
Israel has been continually genociding Palestinians for decades, and yet their population continues to grow every single day. The first tweet stipulated total annihilation, remember? That was the definition he used. But when someone responds doing the same thing, he does a switcheroo. He backpedals from a population that only exists in the history books to a population that has not recovered in growth. That's not what you said, bro. Normal stuff, cool stuff. In the future, when the dust settles about what's going on right now, what's happening to Palestinians, insofar as it...
Jesus. Jewish population in Poland, 3.35 million. Deaths, 2.77 million to 3 million. Holy shit.
needs to settle. I think anyone paying attention, there's no dust. I do wonder what guys like this will be up to, you know? Like his grandkid, Beyonce Jr. comes up to him at the cabin, sits up on his knee and says, "Hey, Pup, where were you during the Palestinian genocide?" And he'll be like, "Well, kiddo, I was in my gamer chair trying to convince everybody that it wasn't happening." And then Beyonce Jr. will say, "Why'd you do that? What the fuck, man?" And he'll say, "Because I didn't want to be wrong." So also it helped me pull 20 million views a month. So there's that. It'll be fine though, you know, big fan base, following the pathway of warmongering liberalism. Every lib journalist that foamed at the mouth to invade Iraq, they're like tenured professors and they work at the Washington Post and write op-eds for that War Crime College Institute place we talked about earlier. No, I'm not coming on your stream. I don't want to get destroyed in the marketplace of ideas, but also that's probably a good thing. The last guy debated live on stream ended up having animated child porn on his computer. I don't think anyone wants to be exposed for that. So lose the battle, win the war, so they say. Anyways, see you guys. Have a good one. Bye.
Remember, the big issue is that when you focus on these stupid words like apartheid and genocide and all these other things, you never actually have conversations about what's actually happening. Same thing with everything today, right? When you focus on mRNA vaccines and the extra death that's being caused by the sneaky string demons that are being introduced into your bloodstream, well, we don't get to have actual interesting conversations on what makes an effective vaccine, when should they be mandated. You know, when you focus on the fact that vaccine passports were created or social distancing was made just so that, I guess, Bill Gates could laugh at how much of a loser he made all of us look. You don't have an interesting conversation like, well, what actually is effective when it comes to social distancing? Did any of these measures actually help? Like, you don't get to have any of the interesting conversations. All you do is you obsess all day over whether or not you're hitting these precise international definitions. And insofar as this conflict in general, or I'm sorry, this conflict narrowly is concerned, when you say things like Palestinians are being subjected to apartheid, genocide, and concentration camp conditions, you also further make the conflict intractable, because why the fuck would you negotiate with somebody who's genociding you? Why the fuck would Palestinians want to negotiate with a person who's engaged in a apartheid, genocidal, concentration campian campaign against you? You're not. You would have no desire to. Not only would you have no desire to, you'd feel righteous in that lack of desire to. I'm not going to negotiate with people genociding me. I'm going to wait for the world to come save me, which is what the Palestinians have been doing forever, and now it's like it just further makes everything fucked. Did you touch on this with Lex? I think I did a little bit, but Finkel Smirk just did a stupid fucking look and stared off into the ceiling while he shook his head and the pachinko machine of his brain cells tried to funnel down into making a coherent thought. They just ended up in him either calling me a motor mouth or saying I read Wikipedia, even though I'm literally quoting like ICJ judges and UN reports at him, but you know. One thing about Israel that I've never seen Destiny address is that it seems like laws that heavily favor Jewish citizens over Arab citizens, Arabs living in Israel, I've never heard of those. I haven't seen that ever. There's like probably some level of discrimination or whatever that happens, but I've never seen good justification for the inside Israel apartheid arguments. Was Norm like no bullshit levels bad? Yes. But hey, listen, the conversation will come out. You can watch it, make up your own minds. Did you all discuss solutions? Yes. I didn't get to express my disgust at this statement, which was very frustrating. But Ween and Finkeldick both said that there were no solutions, that this conflict was over, that there was no hope for anything. That was both their points. And then Finkelstein went on to talk about some other stupid fucking book that he'd read about how I think that it's really important that we're documenting the memories of the Palestinians, and that's what we're doing. We're documenting their memory. And I'm like, I didn't even get a chance because these were like the final words, and I didn't even. And it's like, bro, you're already writing these people all off as basically being dead. Like, you know that they're still alive. You know that they're still there, right? Like, he literally reminded me of the what's the name of that dumb fuck loser who thought his son was dead and he was about to set him on fire, and he's like talking about how sad he is that his son is dead even though he's still alive, and the hobbits have to go in and tell him to fuck off. Like, it was literally that scene.